meeting on the 1st of December 2022. I will chair Councillor Jamie Kemp. All councillors have been sent the agenda for today's meeting. Any members of the public who want to view the agenda can do so by visiting our website www.eastdevon.gov.uk. We will now start the meeting by doing a roll call of committee members here present. Can you please answer your name when you are called, and confirm you're present. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Bailey.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Bonetta.
Present, thank you.
Councillor Davey.
Present.
Councillor Kemp.
Present.
Councillor Parr.
Yes.
And Councillor Whibley. No. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 1, public speaking. I believe there are no public speakers. Excellent, thank you. Agenda item 2, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 3rd of November 2022, pages 3 to 6. Does anybody have any comments on the set of minutes from the 3rd of November? I'll take that as a no. Thank you. The minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of November are therefore agreed. Sorry. Agenda item 3, apologies please.
Thank you. From Councillor Bruce, Councillor Chapman, Councillor Gardner, Councillor Hawkins, Councillor Key, Councillor Rice, Councillor Taylor and Councillor Woodward.
Thank you. Agenda item 4, declarations of interest. Mindful of the new code of conduct, do any members of the committee have any declarations? So please state your declaration, including which agenda item your declaration relates to, state what exactly the interest is and the specific type of interest you are declaring. Councillor Bonetta.
Thank you, Chair. I have an effects NRI on agenda item 8, the portfolio holder annual report, as the chair of a local community organisation called Food Safe. Thank you.
Thank you. And are there any other councillors in the meeting who wish to declare an interest in any items listed on the agenda that may affect their ability to remain in the meeting? I'll take that as a no. Agenda item 5, matters of urgency. Councillor Allen would like to just raise a few points, please.
Yes, normally we have a chairman's comments, seems to be missing, so I've purloined this particular thing just to ask for reactions to the workshop that we held and see if anybody has any comments to make on the CFGS workshop that was held on the role of scrutiny. So just wanted to ask any comments.
Councillor Bain.
Well, I attended it and I found it really very useful, very informative, and I think it's quite good to have training like that, particularly after we've all been doing scrutiny for a while, to kind of just refresh our knowledge. So I found it really good. Thank you.
Councillor Young.
Yeah, just to say, so I was sorry that I missed it, that I had another meeting, but I did view it online afterwards, and it was very interesting. And thank you very much for organising it.
I'll just echo Councillor Bailey and say I found it useful, and yeah, Jess said, an interesting kind of catch up on what we should be doing and whether we're still on the right track. So yeah, it's good.
Thank you, Councillor. Now we'll move on to agenda item 6, confidential and exempt items. There are none. Agenda item 7, decisions made by Cabinet, including portfolio holders, recorded by members for scrutiny in accordance with the overview and scrutiny procedure rules. There are no items to consider. Agenda item 8, portfolio holder annual report, sustainable homes and communities, pages 7 to 17. Councillor Dan Legend to present his report.
Thanks very much, Chair. I want to start by saying there's a lot of I's in this report, but it really is. There's so much support from the officers in this. I just want to start by putting on record my thanks to the service lead and all the other managers that helped write this. I think the whole of the housing team under huge amounts of pressure from, be that the state of the service currently, the work that they're having to do extra, the legislation that's being imposed on them, the workload just seems to be constantly ramping up. And I think with the kind of the national picture of shortage of staff, if anyone can find me a surveyor right now, it would be absolutely amazing. But they are doing a fantastic job in there, and so the staff are under huge amounts of pressure. But yeah, they're absolutely amazing. I just want to touch on a few key points. So under homelessness and rough sleeping, now a lot of members are probably aware that we've received a government grant for a number of years. This previous year was the first year that we actually got some continuation planning. It was a 3-year grant, which actually really helps for service continuity. This allowed us to employ a number of members of staff for targeted support in reducing homelessness and hopefully ending it across the district. A few stats for you. So currently, and this is from the start of November, they'd had 289 live cases of homelessness across the district. There's 159 reports of rough sleeping. Verified rough sleepers, there were 8. Through the work that Rough Sleeper Navigator's done, as well as the other support officers, housing officers, they've managed to halve that this year, and just recently in the past 2 months they've removed 2 people that were long-term rough sleepers. So it shows that yes, it's a lot of funding. I think it's not realised the amount of casework that goes into this and the amount of support that the officers provide. It's a huge amount of effort, and it is across multiple different departments on trying to solve this issue really, and ultimately help our residents. With regards to Ukraine, we've got a number of families still over here. Within the district, we have 3 families that have unfortunately fallen out of their matches and are currently in temporary accommodation. We are hoping to rematch those, but it's just, we're trying to do the best we can right now. With regards to actual temporary accommodation, we've got about 159 families and individuals within temporary accommodation. 56, apologies. That's split with 31 in B&Bs, 8 in the HMOs, and then 8 in other locations. As we go down the report, the poverty strategy, there's been an absolute abundance of work done this. So again, it's across, it's not just my portfolio, it's held within Councillor Rowan's portfolio and the Finance Department. We do still have the poverty working panel that's moved from policy creation to now monitoring. And it is a case of keeping on top of that, keeping up the pressure and doing everything that we can as an organisation to really push that. Moving down to the Housing Winter Pressures Plan, we now have a new community development manager in Alex Higgins, and it's tasked in her team to do a lot of the work in actually pushing forward with our Housing Winter Pressures Plan. We'll discuss that a lot more, and I'll pretty much save that for the poverty working panel with moving that forward. With regards to the asset maintenance management, stock condition survey and decarbonisation, within the whole of property and assets, this is probably the team that is struggled most with recruitment and retention. We should have a team of about 30, and for the last year those numbers have probably been running at about 20. There are multiple officers within that team that are doing 2 people's roles, and I can't imagine what it would be like in that role. Against the backdrop of that, we've got Currently 170 voids. Now, it sounds like a high number, but if you were to look at last month, we got 90 voids through the door. So the turnover of voids is significantly higher than what it should be. It should be around the 25 per month mark, but that's what was contracted for. It's significantly higher than that. So there needs to be some additional work in why is there a larger turnover of our properties. Now, with regards to voids, it should cost around £2,500 to turn over that void and make it another habitable home when someone leaves. Currently, it's between 6,000 and 8,000. So the state that we are receiving the voids back, be that from aging stock, from the way that it's been treated by the previous tenant, there is a significant amount of work that's going in. So he's slightly being slower trying to push these through. Ian Williams have got additional resource in from their Plymouth team to really start targeting this and start bringing the void numbers down, but it is a challenge. If you think that one of our largest costs in voids is clearing and clearances at the moment, so there is a piece of work that we need to do in cost recovery, cost recharges, just to see how much we can recoup for the council. When we're looking at the stock condition survey, it's very well documented. We've got a very old stock, and the longer it goes on, the more it depreciates. They've got a really hard task, and with the stock condition survey coming through, there's a lot of work that will go into prioritising roles, prioritising jobs, to really get to our stock where it needs to be, and there will be some tough decisions. There may come a point where we look at it more strategically and that we look at and advocate for some disposals because they are past the useful repair, and we might need to look to disposing that into the private sector. As we move down, so I've touched a lot on the integrated asset management contract with Ian Williams. Repairs is a huge number, so we are averaging between 900 and 1,200 responsive repairs each month. If you consider that against the backdrop of probably there's 30 to 40 operatives within the Ian Williams organisation, it's a huge number that we're actually going through, and the recall rate is between single digits and 20. So we do not have a large recall rate. I think a lot of the complaints that councillors get are obviously the recalls within that. So I wouldn't want to say it's an echo chamber. There is issues. There are work to be done within communicating with our residents, but the issue is a lot smaller than it actually seems to be if you're looking at the statistics that we're actually getting through. I've already mentioned void properties. It is a key area of focus, and we'll just keep monitoring it and keep pushing it through. My aim is really to reduce those numbers, and so just this last month we put through 60. So if you think that Ian Williams are contracted between 20 and 25 a month, we pushed through 60 in this last month. They are really ramping up the service and doing us justice, really. I think there's a lot of they get a lot of stick because they are the contractors for the contract. When things go wrong, it's them that get hit with the stick, but we need to applaud them when they do well as well. So pushing that amount of voids in and we need to remember that 60 families that are getting into accommodation, suitable, sustainable, long-term accommodation, and I just need to commend them for that. I've mentioned community development. There's a huge amount of work there, and obviously with us moving out of COVID, they are starting to get back into our communities. There's more that we will be doing over the coming years. We've now got Alex Higgins as the manager in that team. You've got Victoria Robinson, who does a huge amount with food poverty, fair share, and really working with our communities to help where we can. Moving on to Homes for Ukraine. Now, it's a bit of a bugbear for me that this was really imposed on the council, that we had to run with this really and with the lack of resources that we currently have, and the challenges that we've got within the service, to have this imposed on us was a real frustration. The team have really picked it up, they've ran with it, and they've done an absolutely fantastic job. Jamie Buckley has really pushed this through. I just need to put on record thanks to her. Moving on to the Housing Task Force. There's a number of sites that the task force are looking into at the moment. The first site, hopefully subject to planning, will be one in Honiton for 25 units. We'll be utilising HRA underutilised land. We are looking across the district, both within the housing revenue account and across our general assets, opportunities that are become present. There are talks of us looking into Jarvis, close within Exmouth, and the disused toilets there, to potentially redevelop those into housing accommodation. That's subject to viability, but it's a really exciting piece of work. Moving forward, I think we need to get away from this asset acquisition program. We don't get enough bang for our buck, really, and we're doing a disservice to everyone by just constantly buying from the open market. If we can be more strategic, get more stock in place of our housing units, then not only have we got more people housed, but we're actually going to be saving ourselves money in the long run. And then once we start employing more, start getting more stock within the actual housing revenue account, we can then be more strategic. Do we look at our Cornish units, which a lot of them are not worth putting as much maintenance into them? They aren't energy efficient. They aren't really great homes to live in, and we do have a lot in it across the district. Should we look to either dispose them or redevelop them for Z-pods, which are zero carbon, highly energy efficient, and we can change the densities around within communities? I think just installing that new amount of stock into it will allow us to be a lot more strategic and push this service forward, and really give us more options. I've read the conclusions there in the report, so I think I've talked for long enough, and I'll just leave it to questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now invite non-members of the committee to speak. Happy? Committee members, would you like to speak? So David.
Yeah. I'm interested, Dan, in why we have such a turnover of tenants. Given that we're supposed to have a housing shortage and a housing crisis, I'm wondering why people are coming into our homes. I don't know what the average length of tenancy is, but it seems as though we're getting people who are coming in and leaving these properties in an absolute state. And maybe that's just indicative of the kind of people sometimes who are going to end up in social housing. But I'm wondering why we're getting such a high turnover of tenants, hence the number of voids that we're getting as well. So any reasons you can ascribe?
Firstly, I don't want to say that it's all tenant related, and that's the reason why void prices are increasing and the actual turnover. It is a number of things, including our stock ageing.
Yeah.
So it can't just be put on the residents themselves. The reason why there's a turnover, it could be a number of different things. Personally, I believe that it's probably to do with the age of the stock. If you look at the housing associations locally, they do have a lot newer stock. So if someone is looking on a Devon Homes choice and they do have a rather high banding, they can easily swap over. So it all depends on the personal situation, what they're looking and where they sit and whether they're in suitable accommodation. Some people might move into unsuitable accommodation just so that it suits them at that time. And then when more suitable accommodation comes on, they then move on. We still have to go through due to health and safety, obviously we have to go through the void process, but that is an additional cost. Now, there is a huge piece of work that needs to go into really drilling down into the data on this and finding out what are the true causes of that. All of the evidence that I've said tonight is anecdotal. So, yeah, it's a big piece of work that we will be doing over the next 12 months.
Thanks very much. Yeah, no, I didn't mean to cast any slur on council house tenants or anything like that. But I think if people are actually moving out of what is not very nice accommodation or slightly substandard into better homes, then that's to be welcomed. But I just wondered why we get such a turnover. Thank you, that's very helpful.
Councillor Vanessa.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Ledger, for your report there. I think it's really, really good seeing all the work that's going on, because it is a massive portfolio and it's one of the biggest pieces of work we need to be doing. Councillor Rowland will remember from his last meeting that I bombarded him with questions. I promise I won't bombard you with too many. I won't bombard you with too many. One of the points I was looking at throughout the report, you mention in various different places about community development. You mentioned earlier about Alex Higgins, bringing her on, which is absolutely fantastic. I met her last week, and about the fantastic work that Victoria does, especially with the Fair Share programme. In terms of the poverty strategy and also the community development side, I was just wondering if you could please outline what steps have been taken sort of in this council year, I suppose, to increase the resilience of our VCSE sector, so sort of looking at voluntary organisations, what we're doing working with them. In terms of the decarbonisation of our stock, I remember going to a viewing with our property assets manager a couple of months back to a property in one of the villages near here. I was just and sort of looking around at the possibilities there, but the price tag was very high to retrofit those properties. So I was just wondering what resource we actually have to retrofit properties and sort of what the timescale is to get those done, considering we've obviously got 4,300 properties on the list at the moment. Very short question in terms of the asset management contract. Can councillors and do councillors have access to the contract to read/understand it? I think that would really help us to know what the boundaries and limits are as to what Ian Williams deals with. And I have a separate question about the site in Honiton, which I'll ask after this meeting. Thank you.
With regards to the contract, I don't see any reason why that can't be shared, but it is 60 different documents with multiple appendixes. I believe it's probably over 1,000 pages long. So to fully understand and digest it, I think you'd be there quite a while. The second question, I'll work backwards. What was the
Retrofitting.
Retrofitting. So we've received a match fund government grant for the first round. That, I believe it was about 1.8, 1.9 million. That will do a set, I think about 100, 150 properties that we'll do. We've just put in a bid last week for another round of funding. And what we are utilising is government funding for this. So obviously government have aspirations to decarbonise housing across the country. There is a dedicated grant that's coming through for that, and we are piggybacking on that match funding with funds from the HRA to improve the energy efficiency. Obviously there is a target of 2025 to get all houses within the social housing sector above a D. Anything below a D we won't be able to relet. With regards to community development and the BCSE sector, so I've already met with a lot of the food poverty groups and food providers within the district. I've got another meeting with them. It's just been moved back actually, so it's January. 13th of January that we'll be having the next one. Ellie Barnes, who is the VCSE coordinator for E7, employed by the NHS, absolutely fantastic and really brings across that. And it's just about having really strong links between our community development, E7, with that group, really. And it's just about really getting good networking in and involving them as much as we can. I think what we're trying to do now, and as part of the comms plan that I've been working with Beth, one of our comms worker, is highlighting all the opportunities that we've got out there at the moment, and it is trying to get it out as much as possible, because there are so many great grants, schemes, everything in between that really isn't shouted about enough, and we need to get it out to the masses.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Councillor Barr, please.
Very interesting report, thank you. You say you'll be considering selling some houses. That sounds very sensible to me. But will we be certain that they have got a section 52, is it?
157.
157, which means they can only be bought by locals. That's so important. I know some of the older houses didn't have that on. So that's one thing. And secondly, will we also be very careful where properties have large gardens and possibly side gardens that could be developed? I know in the past it's been infuriating when people have acquired these and then developed, and the council's just missed a trick. So I do think we've got to be hopefully you'll be very careful about that.
Yeah, so with regards to the first one, yeah, totally. With regards to gardens, that's exactly what Joe Garther, Melissa Wall and Paul Lees are doing at the moment. They are literally scouring our stock with a fine-tooth comb on any developable opportunity really that we've got. That's how we've come across the site in Honiton. We've got another site in Honiton that is looking quite hopeful, but that's outside of that will be through the One Public Estate portfolio. But yeah, we're looking at every opportunity we can. I just spoke at Cabinet yesterday about toilets and we really are trying to reinvent the way that we proceed with this, because it hasn't worked previously. We need to do something different, and there are so many opportunities out there to really up the amount of stock that we've got.
Well, just to continue, garages, I know you've been surveying that. I've been saying, or I said way back, there are some in Colleton.
Yeah, totally agree.
And nothing's happened.
Watch this space.
It's watch this space, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ledger. I'm concerned about mould, and particularly following the tragic death of Awab Ishaq. And what I'd really like to ask you is, can you reassure us and the public that none of our tenants are at risk in the way that he was?
Yes, we will deal with any damp and mould when it's presented to us. I think we've got a damp and mould policy coming to the next HRB meeting. It was already put on the forward plan before this tragedy incident. It was something that we had identified that we really need to scrutinise. I think with the tragic incident that did occur, it really has shone a light on the social housing sector and across all housing associations. We are going to, with obviously that policy, that will implement new processes to ensure that nothing like that will happen in E7. I know that there's been a lot of conversations with Ian Williams on how we proceed with this, what we can do to implement these new processes. We've taken on recently, within the last few months, a new third-party contractor called Envirovent, who will be going around every single one of our properties, surveying them and installing the necessary equipment to properly ventilate our properties. I think that's the key thing. So I see it as a kind of two-pronged approach, that we really need early intervention, so that is from our tenants to inform us that there is an issue, so that it doesn't get to that kind of point, and then we need Envirovent going in there, surveying the property, installing the correct equipment, and remedying it as quick as possible. Follow with that a really good comms plan, educating people on best practices. We see it time and time again where people have tumble dryers and they're facing the vents into the house, and it just increases the inside humidity. I'm not blaming any housing tenant at all, but there needs to be real informative comms and educational comms really on how we reduce damp and mould and how we can really get their early benefit and solve the issues that are present. I can't say that there is no damp and mould across our stock, because there evidently is, the age of the stock. What our job is to deal with it as quick as possible, and to ensure that no one's living with it long term.
Just pursuing the quality of the properties just for a second, because this was a really excellent report, but made even better by your explanation. If we can't rent out properties below Band D, what's the implication for our 4,300 properties?
I think that leads to the need for the work that we're doing through the decarbonisation programme, really trying to improve them. There will be some, like I said earlier, the Cornish units that we won't be able to get up to that kind of level, just because of the fabric. They were prefab, just made just after the war, and they weren't made for being, well, they're very leaky basically.
Yeah.
We'll either have to look at disposal or demolish and redevelop as the zero carbon homes that we're aspiring. It's one or the other really.
At what time scale does this take place?
So we will see from 2025, as soon as we get a void property, that we will not be able to re-let it under a D. So from that time onwards, we will start seeing a slow, I can't put a figure on it, but yeah, when we'll see a slow integration of properties falling into that. That's why we're starting now on what we do, and I think the decarbonisation programme is key to that really.
Yeah. Just to continue that, if I may, if we start now in considering which properties are not going to be eligible for renting in the future, can we put together a programme for selling them off and then bringing in better homes to replace them? I mean, clearly you're way beyond the thinking already, but I'm just concerned that it's quite a turnover that we're going to have to go through.
And that's exactly what, between Graham Baker's team and Joe Garthert, so Graham Baker in Property and Assets, Joe Garthert is the service lead for our housing task force. Between the two of them, that's exactly what they'll be doing. Graham's in charge of all our assets. He'll be saying these we cannot get these up to scratch, and then it'll be working up solutions. But it's going to be individual cases, going to have different things. So that, alongside our stock condition survey, which will be complete over the next 12 months, will really start to drive the agenda. We need to have that, the information from the stock condition survey, so over the next 12 months that starts filtering in. We've just done our pilot. That's really starting to ramp up now, so once we start getting more data through on that, that's when we can start making the more strategic decisions.
Thanks, Dan.
Any other questions? Yes, Bailey?
Yeah, this is a very minor one, Dan, but I noticed you were talking about community centres having broadband and how useful that was for people to be able to access online. I just wondered if there's any support there on hand for people who might be a bit digitally challenged to kind of help them to access things online?
Yeah, so all our support officers will be there at various intervals. I think if any of our residents need it, we've got an abundance of staff that are going into our, not just our sheltered accommodation, but across the stock really, and helping people wherever possible. Yeah, I'm sure that if asked, I don't think they're completely qualified to do IT, but I'm sure they'll help wherever they can.
Thank you.
Councillor Park?
Yes, I forgot to say, and I should have said, that latest tenant magazine, Housing Matters, was fantastic. I thought it was really interesting, well written and colourful, masses of stuff in there. It was good, really, really good. So, I mean, that was in connection with you talking about communications. I think that's very good.
Yes, it's
Way.
one of the best things. I think the council does really well, and it is just thank the officers for all their work into it, because they do work really hard in getting the stories, getting it in, and getting out to all our residents.
Yeah.
Any other questions now? Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to something that Councillor Daly just mentioned, last Monday at the Community Grants panel we were considering a number of applications, many of which did involve the community centres where there were voluntary groups asking for funding, and some of the work that they wanted to do touched on the very subject that you were talking about as well, Ollie. So I see that as a great benefit, and we were really pleased to be able to grant that money, which is about half the fund that we had available to give out on last Monday. And I see that as a great benefit of helping you exactly along the lines that you've spoken about. In addition to a lot of other support work that will also be given you best advice as well.
Thank you.
Just to add a point of clarity, so on the social housing decarbonisation fund, I've just looked it up, it wasn't 1.6, it was 1.5 million, sorry.
Thank you.
I just wanted to come back on the poverty agenda. You know how much I dig into it, and I want to try and follow it, but I've got to say that there's so many complications that are coming through with regard to the poverty agenda at the moment. I'm not quite sure if I am in a position personally to advise anybody about the various different grant funds. It would be very, very helpful to, at the poverty panel, to have a very simple explanation of the different elements that have been put in place. It's maybe just me being thick, but it looks increasingly complex. And as you know, the one thing I'm very concerned about is the disabled element of it, and it doesn't. The words don't appear in the latest proposals at all.
So what I'd like to do, I might put her on the spot a bit here, but is speak to Bethel and just see, I want her to do a briefing to all councillors really on the commons plan that she's built. It's an absolutely fantastic plan that will highlight all of the grants, all of the funds that are available across the council that we are looking to implement into press releases to then put out to the general public. It's really an eye-opener, even for me, looking in and just seeing the plethora of how much help and support we can give, and that's available not just from us as E7, but external organisations that work within the district and can help our residents. So I'll happily speak with her tomorrow and see what she can do, whether she can circulate that amongst councillors or give an actual briefing. But I think that would be the best way forward.
That'd be brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Leisure, for your report. Excellent. Agenda item 9, update on draft training strategy. You'll notice that Councillor Jackson isn't present at the moment. She did contact me just prior to the meeting. She had to deal with a bit of an emergency, and as far as I know, she is on her way and hopes to be here very shortly. If everybody's happy that we can defer that towards the end of the meeting when she arrives, brilliant, thank you. So if we can move on to agenda item 10, please. Quarterly performance report, pages 28 to 72. That's a lot. Any non-members of the committee wish to speak on the report, please? Very quiet. I'll open it up to members of the committee. Councillor Davey.
I had one actually which was under Greener East Devon. I'm whizzing through to try and find it. It was actually about paper reduction, yeah, it's the very last one in Greener East Devon on page 61. It says undertake a review of the use of paper across the service with a view to eliminating unnecessary use, but it's not deemed a current priority at the moment, and I can quite understand that. However, I was at a planning meeting, was it earlier this week? I think it probably was. And I noticed how many councillors had paper copies of what's a very lengthy agenda, over 200 pages I seem to remember. Are we still distributing those to councillors? Obviously when we were meeting online, councillors might request those if they were using their iPad to access the meeting, because they can't use it both for that and to access the agenda. Personally, I've always used the iPad for the agenda and then on laptop or on a device to get into the meeting. I just wondered whether, I mean, if they're printing these off on their own behalf, well, that's fair enough, although it's not really doing much for anybody's use of paper. But are we still sending those out to councillors?
Yes, please.
I don't think we're sending agendas out in that way, in the way that we used to in the old days. I think it's probably an unexpected consequence, or maybe an expected consequence, of being back in the room, for exactly the reason that you say that I have to admit I had a paper agenda for planning, because if I'm at home with Zoom, I have multiple computer screens and I have access to multiple documents. Sitting here, one screen, not an awful lot of space. I suspect if we ask members, I think that's what's happening. So I think there is, certainly from my own point of view, I am printing agendas that I didn't print previously. And that might be a question, if members wanted us to, it's a question that perhaps Democratic Services could ask of members, would help us to capture that data.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I find on strategic planning, we were presented with a report which was 2,184 pages long. Clearly, I couldn't print that at home. Neither could I turn around and ask the council to print it all. And it is a complication, especially when you're dealing with planning documents. There is so many intricate cross-related issues, as you well know, that to expect somebody to read those on a screen and go backwards and forwards, I think it's going to be very difficult. So I think there is a particular justification for planning documents to be printed, but it does mean that I think it ought to be councillors who ask, rather than a routine to send them out willy-nilly. And so my recommendation would be that obviously we want good quality discussions that are well informed. And to do that, I think people work individually, and some will print particular sections at home, which is great. Some will ask for Democratic Services help, but I really wouldn't want to get to the stage of printing for 20 committee members a full-scale agenda, particularly when it's 2,000 pages long.
Just thought the whole point of issuing us with iPads was to reduce the amount of paper we were using. And now I see councillors with iPads and reams of paper. But personally, I find it much easier to whiz through an electronic agenda and find the page I'm looking for than to riffle through reams of paper. That's just me, but I just wonder if it's an area that we could be reducing our use of paper.
Certainly an area we need to look at, and okay, it's not current priority,
No.
but it is a priority at the end of the day. As you say, having the iPads, the purpose of an iPad. Perhaps we should all have 2 iPads.
It does slightly suggest that the cost of the iPads was, not totally justified.
Thank you. Anybody else like to speak on the report?
Well, only to say, I'm very sorry to see the working days lost due to sickness. And a lot of it down to stress.
I think it's affecting a lot of industry across the country, isn't it? Yes, it is.
Hopefully everybody's got their eye on it.
Councillor Allen, do you want to come back, please?
No, I wanted to ask you a different question, certainly. I haven't got a page number for this, but in the service plan objectives for better homes and communities, there is a reference to something called HOUPOA 2802 about reviewing compliance procedures by an external body to drive continuous improvement. I don't know, Dan, if you can enlighten me as to what on earth that is.
Sorry, I missed out.
Right.
Page 49, just
Yeah.
Page 49. It says review compliance procedures by an external body to drive continuous improvements, and there's no progress because recruitment's an issue. I don't understand either entry, I'm afraid.
I'm still trying to find the apologies of that.
Is it to do with voids?
Well, I'm not sure. That's why I'm asking.
Better Homes and Communities
I'm-
Rule
Yeah, on page.
49 towards bottom, highlighted in red.
So compliance procedures are things such as fire safety, asbestos, everything in between.
Right, okay. That makes sense.
Thank you. Any other questions from members? Excellent. Thank you. I see that Councillor Jackson has arrived. Do you want to 5 minutes and we'll move to the next one, or?
5 minutes would be amazing,
Absolutely.
thank you.
No problem at all. So if we could move on to agenda item 11, forward plan. You should have a updated paper copy on your table. The key aspect is that Councillor Allen has requested an additional committee meeting to be called to avoid the sort of February. We've got a lot going on, and March, and looking at an additional meeting on the 9th of March. How everybody feels about that?
Instant response.
They all seem happy.
So, is that what date?
It was the 9th of March to have an additional meeting. Is everybody happy for that proposal to be put and for us to amend the forward plan?
It might just be worth saying, Chair, that part of the logic for putting that in is accepting that by the time we get to the April meeting, we are very likely to be incurred up.
Yes.
So it may be that we'll put that extra meeting in, and we can just, when we know where we are, we can wiggle things around.
Thank you, yeah. Pretty happy, or would anybody like to question it? No?
Well, just a comment. I'm amazed to see that we got to grill down again on the 2nd of February.
Can't wait.
Strategic planning. How on earth are you going to mug up
That'll be
both
fine.
things? God.
It's young.
Young and fit. So if we're in agreement then 9th of March, we can have a additional meeting. Councillor?
Just to say, how would we go about adding items to the agenda for scrutiny?
Adding homes.
Adding items,
Items.
not homes. You're not adding that.
I was going to come back to that.
Yeah.
Right. My reaction to the workshop was that adding items to the overview and the scrutiny agenda is over-complex. And I know Maddie Chapman has been bending my ear in particular, but she's not the only one, to suggest that maybe the form that we've been asked to fill in is too complex. So I would propose that we look at the opportunity of taking on a subject but defining what the key lines of inquiry will be for any topic, so that if an idea for exploration is submitted to the chair, and this is just a potential way of doing it, then it can come in with a proposal of a topic and the key lines of inquiry, and then it can be put to committee. And we can then scope it with officers between myself and Jamie much more easily than if the whole committee tries to create a document. And that's basically just one way forward. And I just wondered what people would think of that.
That just sounds like a taff.
No, that's not. That is for everyday operation with regard to the committee.
But that's what we do for a TAF, isn't it? We come up with lines of inquiry and scoping before the TAF starts, so you've got some kind of framework.
If you're going to do a TAF, that is one mechanism, but it doesn't have to be so intensive.
But I don't see why we need that for a scrutiny item. I mean, I personally thought that the form was quite useful, particularly you had to say whether it was relevant, basically, and does it affect the public and this sort of thing. And then at the end, I thought it's really good having an assessment by Henry, who said, you know, whether it was a valid thing and or whether it wasn't. I thought that was quite useful. Maybe what happened was that we couldn't actually find the forms, and then we couldn't download them, and then we couldn't save them and fill them in and then email them off again. I mean, that was a learning curve, and Debbie sent us instructions, thank you very much, Debbie. But I found I could get subjects on when I wanted to, and I have got one actually that I'm going to send again soon.
I'm interested in opinions. It's your committee.
My feeling is it's content with the forms. I don't so much mind the forms, but I think it all ends up being a bit slow. So say tomorrow I woke up and thought of a really good idea to come to scrutiny. Then I put in a form. Then it would have to probably wait until, you know, it would be maybe filled in by the officers. Then it would come in February. And then when would it actually be discussed? March? So that's what I have an issue, that, you know, we want to do things, things happen, we want to be allowed that opportunity to discuss them. So I'd like to see it speeded up.
Absolutely agree. But how? We're all on the same sheet. We're all agreeing that we want to speed things up. The question is, how do we do that?
I think, Chair, from a monitoring officer point of view, the more detail and the more scoping that's done up front, the less time it takes in that middle stage to scope it. You'll remember what we used to get some years ago was effectively just a subject for scrutiny, and that's very difficult for the officers to comment on and to hit the right mark for members. So it needs that clarity to know exactly what part of housing, for instance, you want to scrutinise. So the more information there is up front, the quicker it is to sort. There is a reality that what you'll need is a report from an officer, and currently there is a timescale to that because of capacity and all of those issues. So there is a bit of a natural lag, but the more information on forms, the more information up front, the quicker they'll go.
Use the forms and put lots of information in. Anybody else?
Or pay for additional resource.
Or pay for an additional resource. That would be a lovely idea.
Put it into the budget.
What did Dan have in mind?
Pardon?
What did you have in mind?
I said add additional resource, meaning officer resource.
No. When you put
What I had in mind,
original question.
whether the council buildings are fit for purpose post-COVID, both for councillors, for the chamber, and predominantly for staff. I don't think that's been looked at. I don't think it's been talked about by anyone, but there needs to be a review post-COVID of whether our buildings are still fit for purpose, and if they do suit all the users, really.
And how green they are. Or not.
Can I just carry on through?
No, Karen.
Take that as an example. How would we want to pursue it as a committee? Not saying we should or shouldn't, but what do you think we should do to actually define that particular issue?
I think you'd want to survey officers and members as one part of that, because I don't think we've probably ever been asked, have we? Not that I can remember, whether we find it acceptable. I think we have to look at, you know, the fact that we're having to, you know, is it satisfying all our requirements in terms of, are we able to hold all our meetings here? No. And I think, you know, particularly from the staff's point of view, I think a detailed analysis of how they find working in this building. I think it's a really, really important thing, and it really would be a good subject matter for our scrutiny committee.
I think as part of that, it's not just this building, we've also got the depots around the district as well, making sure that they're fit for purpose, fit for use, especially in terms of service delivery, whether they're in the right location, whether we've got enough resource in the right places. I think that is really important to look at. And as you say, looking at the green agenda as well and the fabric of this building, I think it is really important to look into that. I think it is something the committee can discuss, but it's something that needs to be scoped out, as an example, of course.
Look, for instance, I think we should have a report of the sort of use of electricity and, you know, how the lights go on and off. Today I came into a training and the sun was beaming in through that window above the balcony and all the lights were blazing away, so I asked where the light switches were. Nobody knew, and the conclusion was it probably sort of a central switch, so all lights or either on or off. I mean, what's going on? I don't run my house like that. Our house, I should say. It's just, I think we do need to think carefully about what we're doing. We're trying to tell residents to save electricity. We've all got to do it, and I think we should have a good look at ourselves here.
Yeah, regarding depots, that's underway at the moment. It's a long-term project, but yeah, we're because of the number of houses, because of the changing way we're doing things. We've also got the issues of charging up vehicles. We need to connect up to a power station for the number of vehicles we've got. So there's all of that we're having to look at the moment.
Thank you.
And I think I slightly disagree with Councillor Bonetta in that I think that this building, I mean, it's a new building, and I think we could look at every building of ours in the district, but I think personally,
Yes.
I think we should be looking at specifically at this building,
Yeah.
because when it was commissioned, there must have been, criteria that we were hoping to achieve from it, and we should be looking back and saying, have we achieved those things that we wanted to achieve? Energy efficiency and all the other things. So I think we should be, evaluating whether we've got what we wanted as part of that exercise. And I also think that we should be asking Tim to do a report as part of that, so that he can put out any concerns that he has or any views that he has, because obviously he, I think, has been very involved in it. And there's also a surveyor, I think, I don't know if he still is, involved in this, but also things like the acoustic, not the acoustics, the microphones and everything. What's happened to it? It should be all working, and I don't just mean today, but just in generally. So that needs to be considered, because it's not working. Was it expected to work? What have we done about it? So I think you could have a report, a multifaceted report, specifically focusing on this building, and as a scrutiny committee analysing, how successful have we been, what looks like success, are we happy with it, what do our users think?
Good case example, isn't it? Now, if we could put that on a document of some kind, a briefing note, then I think that would be brilliant. And since Dan brought the subject up, I think Dan ought to put something in.
Jay, you can have that one for free. I'll give it to you. You can fill out the form as much as you like.
But you see, this is the point. The committee is not just here for the committee members. So if you raise the subject and you don't put a form in, then we end up with the situation as we are experiencing with overview, that nobody puts anything in. So
I feel a slight conflict as a cabinet member putting a report into a scrutiny panel when you should be scrutinising the policy that cabinet creates. So I can put forward suggestions, but for me to actually get involved, I don't think that's right or proper.
okay, if I may. I buy that, because Jeff Young did the same thing. He put suggestions in through somebody else. I'll pick it up because it seems a hot one, and I'll try and turn. Oh, sorry, Helen.
Well, I was going to say, where would it go on this forward plan?
That's a different topic issue. Where would you want it to go?
Well, if you're going to do the work on it, that's fine. Otherwise, I was going to say I would have done it, but when's it going to come up on here?
Well, one of the things I did ask on the forward agenda, and with Jamie's forbearance, I'll explain, is that I did ask for Jeff Young's presentation to be put into March. Because
It's going to be ready by Feb now.
Is what?
It's going to be ready by Feb. That's the date.
Ready by
February. That's when it was originally set.
You get what you get.
And that's the date of fit. That's the date I'm aiming for. So
Fine.
are you saying it's going to be, you want it in March now? Because there's going to be more things coming through at that time.
The option exists if we want to put something in February, we're going to have to take something out. So this is for the committee, and I appreciate the complexity. But that's exactly what happened, having to move the discussion about planning into February. Yeah.
More than happy to go in March if
No,
that's easier for you.
You don't get away that way. No. Well, since you like the form, Helen, why don't you organise the form? I'll circulate it to all committee members and see if we can get a response to say yes, and then discuss where we fit it in. Would that be possible?
Well, I'll have a go and then maybe other people can put in there.
Chair, can I say some of the issues, particularly that Councillor Bailey raised, are being looked at, like the kit already is being looked at because we need to deliver a hybrid solution as well. So that's ongoing. The problems with this kit worked yesterday, worked earlier, not working tonight. But that's all being looked at in light of the hybrid need, and that was, we were hoping, I think, to bring it to Cabinet in January. I don't think we'll be looking at demos, but I don't think that's been completed at the moment. But that will come forward as soon as that's available.
I think, just to finish this off, the other issue is that what you may or may not know is that the previous deputy leader, deputy chief executive, was the one who was specifically brought in to deliver this building, and he left soon after it was completed, having carried out the project. And the immediate reaction from members was that this was too small, immediately. And we could never figure out how that happened. That's quite an issue. And clearly it's more significant in terms of, is it fit for purpose now? And that's perfectly reasonable to ask the question. Somebody take it over.
No. Valid points, mate.
I can remember how it happened. The plans were put to us. I pointed out that this room would be too small, and my comments were ignored. That's how it happened.
That's make two of us.
Yeah. So, no, I've worked in retail, so I know what sort of area you need for the amount of people, the desks. I worked it out on a graph. It wouldn't work. I told them, and we wouldn't listen to.
I've got to say also that the leader of council was not listened to either at that time. Anyway, we shall look forward to discussing this in more detail, but I think that the culprit has fled.
I can't agree with you saying that.
Don't have to, that's just my opinion.
Just make
Might
the
be
point.
worth moving on, Chair.
Yeah.
From statements.
It's a committee design, I'd say, not just one.
Councillor Rowland, do you have something you want to add? Or? Not
Thank
a
you,
comment.
Chair. Not on this particular subject, I'll just sort of take the opportunity. Scrutiny have now had the opportunity of having 3 portfolio reports presented. I just wondered what the views of the committee were now that you've seen 3 portfolio reports. Just what your impressions are, whether there's any lessons that we can learn as portfolio holders for future reports, and whether they've actually hit the mark in terms of what you've been looking for.
I could comment on last month, when you presented your report, which was very good, but I was disappointed there were less a number of members of Scrutiny here to actually hear it and scrutinise it, which I think was a shame. You know, the point of Scrutiny is to do exactly that, and my own personal view, I think it's awkward when you call portfolio holders in to work on reports that then are not scrutinised.
I wasn't here, so I couldn't. I was in Australia.
No, I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying, you know, again, it was very low numbers, which is a shame. So, but other than that, yes, that.
Can I give it the other side and just say what it's like from a portfolio? I don't think it's targeted enough. I think asking us to come here and talk about, I could talk for days about housing, really could. But what would be really good, from my personal opinion, is choose 3 subjects, let's dive into them and actually discuss them at length. And then we can actually get more of we actually can converse the situation a little bit more and actually get a good Q&A out of it. I think you've seen from the report that I did tonight how much I covered, and really we're just dragging a few questions here and there. We're not really gaining anything from it. It's an informational piece rather than a scrutiny piece, where you are scrutinising the work of the housing team and you're trying to improve processes. I think that's the role of scrutiny, and right now with the portfolio holder reports the way that they are, you are just being informed of what's going on in the service, and we could do that in a briefing. You're not scrutinising and improving services at all.
And it would certainly help from your side,
Yeah,
if you knew exactly what it is we
I
want to
agree, because what we were asked for was an annual report, which is what you've got. But I would have preferred as well to have had it more focused in terms of specific areas that, along the same lines that Dan's just mentioned, that we could have done a deep dive into certain areas.
Yeah. So I'm.
Yes, I know you.
I'll move my bid. You've asked for annual reports, so please don't change that now. So I'm halfway through it.
Sorry, Jeff. I do.
Can we have a targeted annual report?
Yeah, thank you. I'll just say, I mean, I personally do find them very useful, because it's great to have an overview of what you're doing, sometimes you can feel a bit cut off as an ordinary member as to what the portfolio holders actually, what their remit is and what they're doing. I think the other thing I'd say in response to Dan's point is, I don't know what 3 things I'd want to really focus on unless I know what areas you're trying to cover. And I suppose, you know, we might have said voids, because that seems to be the big one. But actually you covered that very well in your report, and we were able to ask further questions on that. It's difficult to know what you want to focus on unless you know what the issues are for the portfolio holder. Maybe you, the portfolio holder, should be the person to pick the 3 issues and say, look, I could talk about the whole broad remit, but these are the 3 things I want to concentrate on, because those are the major issues for me, which in your case might have been voids, and repairs, recurrence of ongoing repairs, and acquisition of new properties, which I think is the most exciting bit of that report, and the most optimistic bit, if I could say.
When we started, or I started, with taking the chair of scrutiny, it struck me that there was some defensiveness on the part of Cabinet as to how the committee would be used. And I think that's a fair comment.
Yes.
And what I've constantly tried to do is get a collective approach to be collegiate and constructive, not use it as some form of political platform in any way, shape or form. Now that portfolio holders have got used to this style of committee, then I think we can now move to another level of actually being more clear about the things that we would like to look into. Because there is no reason why portfolio holders need to be in any way fearful of the scrutinisation of their particular portfolios. And I hope that we can keep the political damage away from this committee so that we can genuinely look at constructive critique and not score political points. And that's why I think we can move to a slightly different style of requests to portfolio holders. But that's just my opinion, and I'm only the chair. It's the committee that makes the ultimate decision. Any comments on that?
Well, that's our role, isn't it? To be constructive, to be a critical friend, as we heard in the
Exactly.
training.
Yes,
So we might want to drill down a little more into things, but we're not there to. And I think Megan Armstrong, who came to one of the early meetings, I felt was subjected to a bit of a battering at the time, and I can't really remember what the questions were, but they seemed to be quite aggressive. And I remember thinking, I've got a bowler, a kind of easy one, or a kind of something that feels less confrontational. So I think that can work both ways. And I think scrutiny members need to be aware as well that they're not there to kind of give portfolio holders a roasting, but actually to ask constructive questions that enable them maybe to reflect on their role.
Good. Anybody else?
Well, I do remember that, and I certainly wasn't one of the ones battering, and I thought she did extremely well, and actually I think she was fine about it, but other people were not. Other people did not like it and felt it was an attack. Not members of scrutinies, other people, and sort of more or less tore into scrutiny and said we shouldn't be doing that to the portfolio holder. But I didn't think she was that distressed by it. I think she was all right. It was other people did not like seeing it happening and perhaps didn't understand at that stage what scrutiny committee was, could and should do. So I think it was a bit of a strange one, that one.
I had to negotiate a situation where I was told bluntly that portfolio holders would not attend scrutiny. Now that's illegal, but that's what I was told. And so I have had to, first of all, get to a stage where an annual report was delivered, and now we can move on to a more collegiate, critical friend approach to more specifics. I think we're reaching that point because we have proven that scrutiny is not a political football.
I accept what you say, Councillor, but I do recall when you first mooted the idea of portfolio holders coming forward with their reports, that I actually said I welcome that and I have no problems whatsoever with the concept.
No, I'm trying to be diplomatic.
I know
and
you are, but I
I'm
just wanted to put it on the record that as a portfolio holder, that's what I did say at the time. Thank you.
I appreciate that,
Jeff,
Jeff.
you don't need to say it as well.
And just for the record, just over 3 years ago, I came to Scrutiny and explained about recycling and waste. I quite enjoyed the hard times. So there we go.
There's always one.
Okay.
I think we,
I think Councillor Jackson's probably
yes,
right.
Councillor Jackson, yes. Can we, thank you for all the comments. Can we go back to agenda item 9? Great, you managed to make it, Sarah. So if you'd like to present your report, please.
Thank you. And firstly, thank you to everyone here for bearing with me. I do apologise, I was tied up with a very sensitive emergency rough sleeping situation, so that waylaid me a little bit. And I also don't have the report or the final version of the report that I had intended to give you today. So I'm working from an earlier draft, so you'll have to bear with me just a little bit. I may have to sort of add some bits in as I go, where I know that I made amendments. We'll roll with what I've got. So as the Chair of Member Development Working Party and the Portfolio Holder for Democracy and Transparency, I presented an update on the progress of the Scrutiny Committee at its meeting on the 2nd of December 2021. Sorry, hang on a minute. This is where there's a problem with my typos. At the meetings of Member Development Working Party that had happened prior to that, we'd been considering the post-election induction training, refresher training, and refresher training for new and existing elected members, information for prospective councillors, and the current and future member development needs that we had. At the Scrutiny Committee in December, I presented our progress so far, and we, as a collective, expanded and discussed further on several points at greater length. So those key points were that members needed to be aware that some committees are statutory and require members to be fully trained before they can participate, such as planning and licensing. That group leaders needed to take into account whether members had attended the mandatory training when making appointments to statutory committees. That attendance at training, which was mandatory, could potentially be published on our website, and that various methods of delivery for training could be offered. Moving forward, it was planned that we would develop a members training survey and a members training development plan, which would set out the training needs for members to fulfil their roles. And I agreed to provide a further update to this committee towards the end of 2022, which is where we are right now. So progress over the last 12 months. The Member Development Working Party developed a member training survey, which was circulated to all members. You all would have received it, and it covered all aspects of training and development. Only 20 councillors of the 60 completed the survey, or around 33% of the total membership. But although the numbers were limited, there was still quite a lot of really useful information that came out of that, which was collated and then we discussed at great length in the meetings that followed. What seemed clear for more recently elected members was the sheer scale and volume of what was involved when they became councillor for the first time. And that provided challenges for a diverse group of people who had various different commitments, including full-time employment, childcare, care of other dependents, as well as the practicalities of travelling across what is effectively a very large rural district to undertake councillor duties, which included meetings and training. Many of those responding to the survey found the induction training immediately after the election was invaluable, whether offered formally or informally. There were several different training sessions, some around IT, for example, that were done on a more one-to-one basis. And it allowed councillors to meet collectively with officers and with each other, which was helpful and informative, and I think also assisted in creating support structures. For those councillors who had already served before the last election, training and development seemed to be regarded more marginally, with an existing awareness of issues combined with other commitments and travelling having quite a significant impact on their ability to attend sessions. So the benefits of updating previously learned knowledge or skills really need to be made clearer in the future. There's quite frequently changes to legislation, and it's important that all membership remain up to date where they can, even if they've been doing it a long time. I think it's pretty critical for our role that people remain current and up to date. There was a strong preference generally for more interactive sessions where possible, using practical examples and case studies depending on the subject, and the use of recording of sessions and reference guides so that people had things to refer back to later. Also suggested was some flexibility in whether training sessions would take place in person or held virtually, since both were considered desirable. And I think following the discussions that then followed, it became quite clear it's the interactive nature that people really, really value. So whether the sessions were physical or virtual wasn't quite so important, and actually there's a balance to be struck between attendance and also delivery, and certain sessions will lend themselves better to one or other. Mandatory training was something else we discussed, and in the run-up to the 2019 elections, there was an expectation that councillors would undertake mandatory training, which included code of conduct training, issues and inequalities, with a further expectation that council would consider not putting people onto committees if they'd not done the relevant training. For example, it was expected that training on planning and licensing issues would be undertaken before councillors could take seats on those committees due to the regulatory functions and requirements. More recently, safeguarding has been added to that list of mandatory training, and on that point it's really worth mentioning that despite this being a mandatory training course, which was requested specifically by councillors at a cost, offered on different days and times, to make it as available as possible, only just over half of the total membership have indicated that they would attend one of the sessions, or even responded to our Democratic Services team to say that they weren't able to attend one of those sessions, so that alternate provision might be possible. Obviously this is really disappointing, and we had one of those sessions today. It was the first of the sessions. I have to say it was by the standard of the training that we've had here in the past, some of which has been fantastic. This was, I would say, probably one of the better ones that we've had. It was really very good.
Yeah, it was.
And I think the request was made at that training session, and several people that were at that one. But I would hope that members who weren't at that session would also go back and encourage their colleagues to get in touch with Sue Howe, if they haven't already, and indicate if they can attend one of the remaining sessions, or at least make her aware of where those limitations are. So mandatory training was also suggested to be included as part of the SPAR performance management review as a key performance indicator, showing up thereafter as a percentage of councillors who had been trained on those mandatory topics on a quarterly basis. Attendance at training, which is mandatory, was also discussed as a possibility to be published on the member's profile on the website, and the hope would be that it may encourage members to be more proactive in attendance. One of the things we did establish from the past training sessions is that attendance has been and continues to be a problem in general. A structured member training and development plan will soon be developed for the forthcoming elections, but we've put together an outline plan which is included in these agenda papers that you've been able to review. But at present, without specific times and details of the sessions that will be dependent on the availability of trainers and or the method of delivery, we're not yet in a position where we can really put together a concrete plan. That's something that will follow in due course, and we have to work within the budgets that we'll have available in order to do that. Mandatory training will be offered in the first few weeks after the elections. This is the proposal, which covers issues such as the code of conduct, data protection, standards in public life, safeguarding, equalities, alongside an understanding of how the council framework works, and an introduction to everyone in the senior management team. This would be offered in a phased manner, with other recommendations for training over a longer period, with several opportunities to do it through different methods wherever possible. This primarily came out on feedback about the sheer volume of information that councillors had to digest following their election. And so it was felt that actually a phased approach where we tackled the most critical stuff first, and gave time and space for councillors to find their feet before learning the extra stuff to make them better councillors, would probably equate to better councillors in the long term, because they've been able to retain more of that information and apply it and learn from it. So then moving on to resource requirements, and this was discussed at length, so I'll read what I've got here, but there were a few comments that I think alter this slightly. So it was difficult to assess that the resources required for this work at this stage. Obviously costs are increasing, but we have based a very loose outline on experience from previous years, with a guesstimate of increased training costs based on the initial research that's been conducted by officers with those trainers. The level of budget required is dependent largely on the form of delivery employed as well, whether that's online and offline. So for example, the request for a QC based in London, who is an expert in licensing law, to be accommodated at East Devon while they deliver the training, will be an amount approaching £3,000. There is some training that could be provided in-house, such as planning, things around planning, and ongoing training throughout the year that could be offered via webinars online, where interaction and Q&A sessions are informative and engaging. So there's your two ends of the spectrum there, and it's being smart with the budget that we end up having to maximise the training opportunities that we have there. And for example, it may be that we engage with a QC of the same level, but we ask for those sessions to be done online, because it would then free up a lot of budget then to apply to better training in other areas too. So it is suggested at the moment that we look at a budget for around about £10,000 to be made available for the member development programme, which could include both the mandatory and recommended elements of the training programme. And that, I think, is what we're recommending be put forward so that we can at least start budgeting scoping around that. So Member Development Working Party has got to present a report to Cabinet in January. That's where the reporting line effectively for this lives on this particular subject. And we reviewed a draft of that report at last meeting, and there are some recommendations that have come out of those. I'm just going to loosely go into those rather than the exact wording, because actually there's some tweaks that need to be made with that. So I'm working with Sue Howe to mop up a lot of the comments that were made at that meeting to try and incorporate those as well. And at that point we'll have a draft report that the members will be able to consider, and then we'll be able to take that to Cabinet in due course. So the recommendations are largely around these elements. So they're to adopt the Member Development Working Plan, which specifies the mandatory elements of training, which all members have to undertake. The draft Member Development Plan, including identifying mandatory training elements to be recommended for adoption. That the Member Development Code of Conduct is revised, so that references to the mandatory training identified as part of the adopted Member Development Plan is specified and included to ensure that a failure to attend those mandatory training sessions would also constitute a breach of the Code of Conduct. And this would require a recommendation to Council to change that constitution. It wouldn't stop a Cabinet as well. If this is agreed, then the penalty for not attending mandatory training would then need to be dealt with through the Code of Conduct complaints. Another recommendation is that attendance at mandatory training would be uploaded to the member's profile on the East Devon website, and that would be included, and that it would also be included as a key performance indicator in the Council's performance management system, and monitored as part of the quarterly review as a percentage of councillors who had received that training on a mandatory topic. I will add here that further discussions around that particular subject identified that whilst we want to make it clear to all members that particularly around mandatory training these need to be completed and that there are repercussions if they're not, we also recognise that not everyone may be able to attend the sessions that are there. So comments were made around ensuring that there were methods for people to catch up, but also to delay any publication of people's mandatory training records until a slightly later stage after the induction training, which then effectively levelled the playing field and gave people an opportunity to make sure that they had completed that before it's made public. And I think the goal is really to give people time and space to learn and get that right, and it not be used for political capital, which I don't think is really fair, particularly when you have new councillors with various different responsibilities outside of council, who are coming into an environment with other councillors who may have done that mandatory training many, many times and already have their record up to date. So it's really about just trying to make sure that it's fair, but it still gives an expectation of what needs to be achieved, and gives members of the public reassurance that that training has been done. Another recommendation was around the budget and the £10,000 for a phased member development programme for the induction training, which again would include the mandatory and recommended elements, and that wherever possible training should always be made interactive and made available in person and or online, preferably both, in a variety of formats to suit different learning styles, and made available at different times as well to suit people's different other responsibilities and commitments. And that's where we're at the moment. We have had a couple of different sessions very, very recently, which has got us to this most recent stage. Unfortunately, the meeting before last we had to abandon towards the end and had to reconvene because we weren't core at that one. But we have had reasonably good attendance from members who aren't part of the Member Development Working Party. But I think, as you're finding here in this committee as well, I think just attendance in general can be a bit of a tricky one, and that certainly extends to training as well as the Working Party. But that's where we're at the moment, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Sarah. Can I ask a question? training for elected members partway through a term. How is that going to be addressed in the future? Or how can you see it?
Yeah, so it was something that was picked up, and I think it's going to continue to be something that is always going to be tricky, because when you run an interactive session, that's obviously not going to be available to those who start midway through. But I think it has been recognised amongst other councillors, but also officers, that if you're joining halfway through, there are some quite big gaps in knowledge. So we looked at all sorts of different subjects between, and it came through in the survey as well, you know, suggestions around whether people could buddy or have, you know, set people that they could contact or within groups. And it's been quite difficult, particularly for the most recent cohort as a group of independents. That's been sort of majority influx of new faces, to have that support, because they don't have a party, although there are groups within that have provided support. And I think that's where the Democratic Services team have been invaluable. That was recognised within discussions. But also, I think there are key things that have come out, further discussion as well, which I think are being acknowledged as well, around making sure that there are other resources available that come through that training that people can then refer back to. And it's those key learning resources I think are going to be pretty invaluable for those that are joining a council midway through a term, as well as having these sort of catch-up sessions. And it works for mandatory training, but it applies to other training as well, where there are things that people can, you know, log in to review the videos from recordings from training sessions, or undertake, you know, walk-through training sessions. And we have had online training available in the past, although it hasn't been very well used. What we do have is effectively a library of various different resources available to us, but it's not up to date. So that's something that the Democratic Services team, I think, are looking at trying to get back up to date, because for someone joining later on who hasn't got those training opportunities, it's going to be crucial as a reference guide, if nothing else. And I think there's always the ability to make contact with the key officers on any particular subject, to have one-to-one based training sessions. And I think that is something that came through discussion as well, was it's important that officers understand that there are going to be those gaps and make time if they possibly can to do that. And I think also part of that, several comments came up about members being able to have a list in their induction training of who the core officers are, what their functions are, and have a better understanding of those things. And once we have that, it means that when someone is newly elected in halfway through a term, at least they have a referral list to know who to ask in the first place. Because often, if you're coming into an organisation, you don't even know where to start asking for help. So they're the things that we know we can start developing. And I think there's a greater understanding around those. I hope they come forward as well as time moves forward.
Brilliant, thank you. I only asked because that's what happened to me.
Quite.
Councillor Young.
Yeah, there's some, you're talking about mandatory training, which I know you have to do that, do the mandatory before we go on to planning. And also there's licensing, where there's issues there that you need to have that training. And I'm just wondering if, for instance, I did both those trainings 6-7 years ago. Do I need a refresher course after that space of time? Is that sort of stipulated, or I can see that change in council in next May, there could be issues with licensing and planning.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to take advice from officers about whether that needs to be refreshed. I was under the impression that it did need refresher training at regular stages, and certainly it's been made available to members to do it. And I think when we get to a point at which we are making those mandatory and regulatory training records more public, I hope that members will take on board the necessity to do those, because I think it's very, very easy to not engage with those things because you've done it before and think, oh, it's okay, I've got a pretty good idea what's going on. But particularly with planning and licensing, rules change, you know, legislation changes.
My feeling was a bit like getting my driving test done. Now, once I've done it, I don't have to do it again. But I can see that both areas are changing dramatically. So we would need to have refresher courses. I haven't seen any since I've come off those committees.
Is your driving getting that bad, Jeff?
Oh,
Is your driving getting that bad?
I have to get my driving licence updated every year now.
Well, one of the things we had discussed in an earlier meeting actually of the member development working group, and I think it was something that we mentioned at Scrutiny when I gave my first report, was around the fact that often it's only really members who are on those regulatory committees that are having the training brought to their attention. And comments have been made actually that it would be really useful for other members to engage with that as well, because certainly with licensing and with planning, and there is training delivered to members for, certainly for planning, which is more a top level overview, but having that deeper understanding made available to them helps them when it comes to being consulted on a licensing application, for example. And if you haven't done licensing because you're not on the licensing committee, you don't understand the process necessarily. So it was discussed, and certainly as we move into kind of formulating a better, a more concrete plan, I'm more than happy to pick that up with officers just to make sure that that's being extended always to all members. And brought to the attention of people who've done the training in the past but maybe also sitting on the committee again, please do refresher training, it is critical.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. One thing I don't think we have, and I might be incorrect, is a kind of shared online space where everything goes. And so, for instance, Devon County Council has a SharePoint site where they upload all the training. So then, and there's who's who and everything's there. So you can just go and kind of dip in, and if you've missed a training, then you can go and look up there if you don't know which, I know it's a much, much bigger organisation, but I wonder whether that would be possible, because I think having one kind of central place that people can just kind of go to would be quite good if that's possible. Because I think when you get emails, it's hard to keep track of where they are.
So I think actually we do, and I can't recall because I always mix the two up. I don't know whether it's Gov or whether it's extranet, but yeah, Gov. The training is supposed to be added to that along with any other resources, training guides and things that might go alongside your training. However, I don't think that's up to date, and it's certainly something that Sue Howe said she'd pick up with Democratic Services just to check that everything's been uploaded. But certainly moving into the next election term with new induction training, I think, completely agree with you, as do other members on the working group, that those resources need to be there. And that again goes back to what I was saying to Jamie about those elected mid-term having access to those.
Because I use Modern Gov, but I use it for things like, updating my register of interests, and maybe I've just forgotten that it's, there's a big resource there that I'm just...
Well, I can't get into it at the moment. So
Is that the councillor library?
Yeah.
Yes, I can't get into that either.
Thank you. Jake?
Thank you, Chair. And before I say anything, I just want to say thank you for that detailed report. I think it's really, really helpful, especially much like Councillor Kemp, someone that's come in halfway through. I think having a layout for mandatory training is absolutely fantastic, and the detail on there will be really, really invaluable for new members coming forward. Just for a bit of context, the only two bits of training I've really received as a councillor were both in, I think, August of last year. One was actually delivered as part of the town council, which was code of conduct training. So I never got any code of conduct training specific to East Devon. And the only other bit of training I got was some planning training, which I specifically went after and asked for. So apart from that, I haven't had anything. So as long as that doesn't affect my record, I'm happy. I think that's sort of the key thing. Looking at all of these bits of mandatory training, making sure that there's no gaps with new members coming aboard, making sure there's a budget to do that, and making sure that it's all available online, I think is really important. I've also had the same issues with the council library, getting that to work. So it's pretty much all I had to add. Just a massive thank you for the work, and looking forward to seeing it in action.
No problem. And I would like to just respond that one point I think is critical, and I again will pick that up with officer colleagues as well, because I think when you're entering into something, you don't know what you don't know, so requesting training is tricky. So even if you had a list of the induction training that was provided for councillors when they joined as part of a group, you could at least look at that and go, well, hang on a minute, I really at least want to focus on this, this and this initially, and then you've got an opportunity to work your way through, skill yourself up as it moves ahead. There was one other thing that access to Modern Gov does remind me. One of the other comments that came up was around training with IT equipment and IT interfaces, and it was recognised that actually none of the training works unless you know how to use the equipment that you're provided with. So I know there's an exercise ongoing at the moment separate to this around what IT equipment is most appropriate for members moving ahead, and the interfaces with the council as a whole as part of digital transformation. But it's certainly within the plan that you have. We're looking to put greater emphasis on the IT training right at the very outset to give all members the ability to engage with all kinds of training at as much as they possibly can.
Yeah. One of the key things for somebody new is to be able to get hold of that referral list and know who the officers are and what they do. And we used to have a little booklet that was produced yonks ago, and I still have it, and it's still valuable in just thinking what positions are. The fact that it's now 12 years out of date or 10 years out of date doesn't really help a lot. And I don't know why we don't, with our wonderful IT access capabilities, have a list somewhere that we can refer to. Maybe we do, but it's not one that I'm aware of. Do we?
I've got one of officer contacts.
Officer contacts?
Yes, I don't know how. I think it's probably 2 years old or something. But
Yeah.
I've got one.
Well, the point I'm making, particularly for new people, is it's very important to know who is doing what and how, and to know the protocols for actually asking for the right favours from people. The second one is the question of mentoring. So if you've got a buddy system working, then an experienced counsellor can help through all of these things. I was given a mentor, and I don't think that he ever actually sat down and talked with me, much to my annoyance. Part of the reason was I was already experienced in South Somerset. And South Somerset has an excellent system which is like your Learning Nexus idea, where you can actually look up anything you want from a variety of librarian situations, and you can literally get what you want. So we should have a good look at what other people are doing and see whether or not we can't at least piggyback somehow. With regard to online training, which is exactly what that was, there is another aspect to it, which is how do you stay updated? And I've buried myself in incoming emails. I found that very difficult, but there are one or two that are really good, and the LGA is one. Now, the LGA costs this council £1,200 a year if we were to subscribe, and that's all it takes. And that is for everybody, officers as well as members. So they have such, as you've highlighted, such a good range of training materials. But there are individual resources that we don't tap into, and they are purchased by officers for their technical use. But when the council has a subscription to a particular magazine, and one of the best examples is Planning Magazine, then why not make it available to the members? It just seems a no-brainer to me. So we perhaps need to look at the resources that we do have with officers that are not available to members, and see if we can open up some free opportunities for members.
I think we are a member authority of the LGA training programme actually. I certainly have found when looking to undertake some of the LGA training, we've either got discounted rates or it's free as a result. Certainly when you put in your contact information, it comes up with East Devon as one of the authorities on their drop-down list. And I do think there are, I've circulated some LGA-based training in the past as well, to all members, particularly around member safety, because it was topical at the time. But any member can sign up to their training updates, and I would strongly encourage people to do that, because there's all sorts that come forward from there that would be incredibly useful, I think, for anyone looking to develop their skill set as a counsellor. And certainly the Democratic Services team do look at the training available through the LGA when they're putting together their training programmes too. I would be quite interested to see the Nexus type setup that you're referring to. I've not
No,
seen
that was in your
myself.
report.
Oh, no, sorry, you were talking about something that you'd
I was
experienced
talking
elsewhere.
about a different one in
Yeah.
Somerset.
That's the one that I would be quite interested just to know a little bit more about, because I agree with you, if we can learn from other people as well, fantastic. That would be great.
And a recommendation about officer resources?
No, I think it's a great comment. Certainly I can pick that up with Democratic Services just to see if they can do a little bit of an exploration about what it is that's being delivered to officers that might be actually applicable to our membership as well.
Okay. Any other questions? Comments from members? Thank you for your report, and that brings our meeting to an end. I'd like to thank everyone for taking part.
Thank you, Jamie, for stepping up.
No problem. Thank you.